"Don't touch him. He bites anything that comes near the kitten." The voice was sharp, trembling with fear and frustration, and it echoed down the narrow corridor of the emergency vet clinic. Dr. Isaac Rowe looked up from his chart, eyebrows furrowed. Another stray? Another abandoned pet fight? It wasn't uncommon in this part of the city, but something in the woman's tone made him set the file aside and head straight for the intake area. As he rounded the corner, he stopped in his tracks. Large, mud-streaked Labrador was curled tightly around a tiny gray kitten, so small she looked like a puff of ash against his broad chest. The dog's body trembled, not from pain, but from effort. He was holding her as though she were the last living thing in the world, and when one of the nurses stepped even an inch closer, the dog growled, a low, guttural sound that vibrated the floor. Not angry, just protective, desperate. "He hasn't moved since they arrived," the receptionist whispered. "A man found them near the old train depot. Said the dog had dragged the kitten under a collapsed shed and wouldn't leave her even when people tried to feed him." Isaac approached slowly, his hands raised, voice low. "Easy, boy. No one's going to hurt her, I promise." The dog didn't growl again, but he didn't relax either. His eyes flickered up to Isaac's face, dark, alert, pleading. He didn't want to run. He just needed someone to understand that this little life beneath him was more than a stray. She was the reason he was still breathing. Isaac knelt, shifting closer inch by inch. As he did, a sharp, smoky scent hit his nose. Burnt hair, charred wood, something else. He leaned forward, just enough to look past the Labrador's neck and down his side. That's when he saw it. Beneath the matted fur, streaked along his ribs, and belly were the unmistakable marks of fire. Blackened skin, puckered tissue, old, partly healed burn scars, and fresh ones too. Isaac's chest tightened. Oh God. They had come from somewhere bad, somewhere violent, somewhere that should have killed them both. "Get me a gurney," Isaac said quietly, never breaking eye contact with the dog. "We're not separating them. We'll treat them together." That night, under the soft hum of surgical lights, Isaac and his team worked gently, as though repairing a painting that had nearly turned to ash. The kitten, barely 4 weeks old, severely dehydrated, and suffering from smoke inhalation, was stabilized first. She didn't cry once during the exam, only let out the faintest wheeze when lifted away for oxygen. The dog whined the entire time she was out of his sight, even with sedatives trickling into his veins. When they finally treated his wounds, Isaac saw the full extent of the pain he'd carried. Most of it wasn't fresh. It was old. Scar tissue that had long since become part of his skin. Whoever this dog was, he had been through fire before, and yet here he was again, walking back into flames to shield something smaller than his own paw. The next morning, the two lay together in a heated recovery pen. The Labrador, now cleaned, stitched, and medicated, rested his chin atop the kitten's tiny spine. She had curled into the crook of his front leg like it was made for her. Her breathing was shallow but steady. Isaac stood at the window with the chart in his hand, but he hadn't written a word. Instead, he stared through the glass with the kind of stillness that only came when something inside you cracked a little too wide to fix quickly. "I've seen a lot," he whispered to himself, "but I've never seen that." Behind him, a nurse spoke softly. "We gave her a name, Ember. It just fit." Isaac didn't respond for a moment. His eyes hadn't left the dog. "What about him?" The nurse hesitated. "We haven't picked one yet." Isaac exhaled slowly, tapping his fingers against the clipboard, then said, "Ash. His name's Ash." No one argued. In that small, quiet pen beneath a warm light and layers of gauze, Ash and Ember slept. Together, they looked like two survivors of the same storm, one carrying the fire in his skin, the other still flickering softly, as if waiting for the wind to decide whether she would grow or fade. But Isaac saw it now. She wouldn't fade, because Ash would never let the flame go out. Again, Ash didn't move for hours. Even as the medication calmed the pain surging beneath his skin, even as Ember was taken in and out of the oxygen chamber, he kept his body curved protectively toward her, like a shield that had failed once but refused to fail again. Nurses worked, in quiet awe, stepping softly, whispering instructions, knowing that one wrong movement could shatter the fragile piece clinging to that recovery pen. Dr. Isaac barely left their side. He couldn't, not after what he'd seen in Ash's eyes. That wasn't just animal instinct. That was devotion, forged in fire. He'd treated dogs with trauma before, dogs who had been through hell and barely, Come back, but never one who had walked through it willingly to carry someone else out. The chart gave no history. No tag, no microchip. Just a note. Found beside a burnt-down shed. Rescuer said the dog was digging under collapsed timber with his teeth. Refused to leave. Wouldn't eat. Wouldn't let go of the kitten. It wasn't just the burns that told the story. It was the way Ash whimpered in his sleep. The way his legs twitched like he was still running through smoke, still trying to reach Ember. It was the way his body shook when she coughed, and how he pushed his head under her chin until she stopped. By day 3, Ember had started responding more. Her eyes opened for longer stretches. Her breathing grew stronger, but she was still silent. Not a single meow, no cries, just blinking stares and the constant curl of her body against Ash's chest. It was like she didn't know how to exist without him now. That morning, Isaac walked into the staff lounge and found his youngest assistant, Clara, staring at her phone. Her hands were trembling. "Dr. Rowe," she said, voice caught in her throat. "I found something." He stepped beside her, eyes flicking to the screen. It was a local news article, only 3 days old. Fire destroys abandoned property. In East Ridge, no human casualties. Cause under investigation. One witness claimed to see a dog dragging something from the rubble. There was a photo, grainy, faint, but Isaac knew what he was looking at. Ash, mouth clenched around something small and limp. Smoke clouding the frame, his body covered in soot. Clara scrolled down. "There's a witness named Franklin Groves. Said he followed the dog after the fire. Said he saw it dig under a collapsed floorboard and pull something out. But no one believed him. He reported it to animal control, but they didn't find anything." Isaac's chest grew tight. They didn't look hard enough. The truth was becoming impossible to ignore. Ash hadn't just survived a fire. He'd gone back into one. Carried Ember out, then returned to where he last saw her sibling, her mother, maybe even her entire litter. The way his paws were shredded when they arrived, the broken nails. He'd tried to save more than one, but only Ember had survived. Isaac leaned against the counter, one hand pressed to his forehead. "He's not just protecting her," he muttered. "He's grieving with her." Later that afternoon, as the clinic quieted and the sun slipped behind the horizon, Isaac brought a small bowl of wet food into the pen. Ember hadn't eaten solid food yet, but they had to try. He knelt, setting the bowl nearby, giving her space. Ash raised his head and watched, his eyes dull but focused. Isaac held a finger to Ember's nose, then gently dipped a spoon into the food and brought it to her mouth. She didn't flinch, but she didn't move either, until Ash let out the softest, most broken sound Isaac had ever heard. Half whimper, half encouragement. And then, like she'd been waiting for his permission, Ember leaned forward and licked. The spoon, everyone watching, froze. Ash wagged his tail once, just once, and then rested his head again, as if the small miracle had been all he needed. That night, Isaac sat in his office, writing notes for a post he didn't think he'd ever share. But something inside him knew this wasn't a story he could keep. Locked behind patient charts. People needed to see this kind of love. Not the flashy kind, the kind born from ashes, the kind that healed slowly, quietly, one heartbeat at a time. He titled the post, "Ash and Ember, a fire that saved them both." By morning, it had gone viral, and while the world began to weep and wonder over two nameless souls who had found each other in ruin, inside that small pen at the back of the clinic, a kitten began to purr for the first time. A slow, shaky rumble pressed into the chest of the Labrador, who had never once let her go. The clinic hadn't seen this many visitors in years. By the 5th day, Ash and Ember weren't just two nameless animals recovering in the back room. They were local legends. People brought donations, blankets, toys, letters with hand-drawn hearts, and framed photos of pets they'd loved and lost. The story had broken something in them, and strangely, it had mended something too. But none of it mattered to Ash. He only lifted his head when Ember stirred, only opened his eyes when her breath hitched or her tiny paws twitched in sleep. He refused to eat unless she was near, even after her lungs cleared enough to breathe without help, even when she was strong enough to walk. He watched her like she might disappear again, like the world might betray them both if he looked away for even a second. And that fear, Isaac realized, wasn't going away. It was deep-rooted, unspoken, but ever-present in Ash's body language. The slight tremble when Ember wandered too far. The way he'd drag himself across the floor, just to rest his nose against her side, as if checking she was still real. The pain in his eyes didn't come from wounds anymore. It came from memory. Then came the twist no one expected. That evening, while the clinic buzzed with visitors, a man walked in without a word. He wore a faded green jacket, dusty boots, and a tired face that seemed far too familiar. Isaac noticed the tension in his jaw, the stiffness in his movements as he approached the counter and asked for the dog from the fire. "His name's Ash," the man said quietly. "He was mine." Clara glanced toward Isaac, startled. He nodded and approached. The man introduced himself as Reed Thomas. He explained, without drama or emotion, that Ash had gone missing nearly a year ago after his truck had been stolen outside a gas station. At the time, Ash was sitting inside the back seat, with a litter of newborn kittens Reed had found abandoned in a ditch. He'd wrapped them in his flannel and left Ash to guard them while he ran in for water. The truck was found 2 days later, burned to the frame in a junkyard miles away. No bodies, no survivors. Authorities assumed the animals hadn't made it. "I thought they were gone," Reed said, staring at the clinic floor, voice gravelly. "But now I know. He must have gotten out somehow, carried at least one of them with him." Isaac studied the man. His words weren't rehearsed. His eyes weren't filled with expectation or demand, only guilt, real raw guilt that clung to him like smoke. He wasn't here for attention. He was here to answer the question that had haunted Ash's silence since day one. Reed stepped toward the observation window, and the moment Ash saw him, everything changed. The Labrador rose instantly, ears alert, tail frozen mid-air. Ember stirred but stayed close. Ash stepped forward, 3 paces, then stopped. His eyes locked onto the man's face like trying to remember the shape of something once lost in fire. Reed knelt down, barely breathing. "Ash, I'm so sorry, boy." The dog didn't bark, didn't run. He just stood there, chest rising fast, trembling not from fear, but from recognition. And then, with a whimper so soft it barely reached the glass, he moved, slowly, hesitantly, one paw, then another, and when he reached the door, he sat down and waited. Isaac opened it, heart thudding. Ash stepped out and nudged his nose against Reed's chest, collapsing into him as though something he'd held inside had finally broken. And behind him, Ember let out the smallest cry anyone had heard from her yet. A searching sound, uncertain and afraid. Ash turned immediately, trotted back, and pressed his head against her. She stopped crying the moment he touched her. Isaac watched it unfold like a closing circle. The fire, the flight, the fear. It had all come full. But what stunned him most was what came next. Reed didn't ask to take Ash back right away. He didn't demand to be reunited or push Ember aside. He sat there on the floor of the clinic for an hour, just watching the two of them rest. He asked about Ember's treatment, offered to cover every cost. But when Isaac told him that Ash hadn't spent a moment away from the kitten since the fire, Reed nodded slowly. "Then he's not mine anymore," he whispered. "He's hers." That night, Isaac stayed late. Alone in the office, he updated the records one last time. He stared at the file for several long minutes before writing 2 words in bold: status, family. Whatever came next for Ash and Ember, one thing was certain. They'd already been through their trial by fire, and they had come out of it together, scorched but unbroken, bonded not by blood or breed or even species, but by something far deeper, by love that survived burning. Ember was walking again. Not perfectly, not without stumbling or trembling when the room got too loud, but she was standing, on her own, climbing onto Ash's back with her tiny claws and curling into the curve of his spine like it was made for her. And Ash let her. He never flinched, never moved too quickly. He adjusted to her weight, as if it had always been there, as if her presence had become part of how he understood the world now, and everyone at the clinic noticed. The shelter director, Monique, brought her 6-year-old son to visit, and the boy burst into tears when Ember climbed into his lap with Ash sitting nearby like a watchful shadow. Clara wept quietly that same night, holding Isaac's hand in the break room, whispering that she'd never seen anything like this, not in her 20 years of emergency animal rescue. But not everyone was ready to let it go. A few donors had questions. The shelter's board wanted to know why a grown Labrador was being bonded to a kitten when rehoming efforts were needed. They started asking about separation, about adoption possibilities, separate adoption. They didn't see a family when they looked at Ash and Ember. They saw a pairing that could be split for convenience. Isaac didn't say anything at first. He listened to the whispers behind office doors, to the polite suggestions that maybe it was unhealthy for a dog to be this obsessed with a kitten. He knew what it sounded like, textbook anthropomorphism, but they didn't see what he saw. Ash had been licking Ember's ear when she cried out in her sleep. Not loud, but sharp, sudden, like pain. Isaac rushed over just in time to see the kitten bolt into the corner of the kennel, her body trembling, her tail puffed. Ash didn't bark or whine. He lay down, slow and low, crawling on his belly toward her like a soldier approaching an injured friend. When he reached her, he didn't nudge or touch. He just lay there beside her, nose almost to her paw, eyes soft and unblinking. And Ember, still shaking, pressed her head to his, then slept. That was the moment Isaac knew separation would break them both, and yet the pressure was building. The board scheduled a visit, a formal one, with clipboards and evaluations and photos. 2 families had shown interest in adopting Ash, both childless, both financially stable, and both very eager to take home a dog with such a heroic story. Neither of them mentioned Ember. When asked, one even said, "Oh, the kitten? She's sweet, but we don't do cats." Isaac had to leave the room before he said something he'd regret. Clara followed him out, her jaw tight. "They can't be separated," she said, her voice low. "That dog, he's healing because of her, and she's surviving because of him. If they lose each other now," she didn't finish. She didn't have to. Later that evening, after the visitors had left, Isaac returned to the recovery room and found Ash sitting near the window, his back to the door. Ember was curled up on his back again, eyes half shut, one ear twitching slightly, at the sound of wind rattling the pane. Outside, the sky had turned to ash and gold. Clouds stretched like torn cloth over the fading sun. Isaac sat beside them and whispered, "We might not have much time." Ash didn't move, but Ember raised her head. Her eyes found his, and in them, small and fragile as they were, Isaac saw something he hadn't seen in days. Fear. It was a look he'd seen in war animals, in dogs who'd lost handlers, in rescue cases where the heart breaks long before the body does. And suddenly, Isaac made a decision he hadn't planned on. He stood up, walked straight to the front desk, and without consulting the board, filled out a form. "Name?" Clara asked, confused. "Isaac Monroe." "Address?" He gave it. Every line, every signature, every required checkbox marked, and, when she looked up at him, startled, he said it before she could. "They're coming home with me, both of them." Clara stared for a second, then slowly smiled through her shock. "But the board, let them argue. Let them fire me. I don't care. This isn't just a rescue anymore. It's a promise. They don't survive without each other, and I don't think I want to survive a place that doesn't see that." The next morning, the official announcement went out. Ash and Ember have found their forever home, together. The photo they posted was taken just before sunrise. Ash lying in the grass outside the clinic, Ember perched on his head, her little paws tucked under her chin, looking like royalty. It went viral within hours. And the board? They stayed quiet. Sometimes love speaks louder than policy. That night, Isaac brought them home. His house wasn't perfect. Old wood floors, a small backyard, cracked tiles in the kitchen. But it was warm. And when Ember stepped across the threshold, she didn't flinch. She sniffed the floor, jumped onto the couch, and curled into the throw blanket like it was stitched just for her. Ash followed, slow and steady, his tail wagging once, then again. Clara visited the next day, and when she walked in, she paused. In the doorway, Ash and Ember were asleep on the couch, curled together, breathing as one. A fire burned softly in the hearth. Rain tapped the windows, and for the first time since the day of the rescue, the world felt safe again.